everybody should consider having regular lab blood tests done. This is especially important if you're on an anabolic steroid or an anabolic drug program. By having these blood tests done, you can monitor your condition, certain parameters in your body, and it can kind of give you an early warning sign if you're getting in trouble. But anyone, regardless of whether you're taking drugs or not, you should monitor you should have regular lab blood tests done to check, for example, your cholesterol levels, your red blood cell levels, your immune response, the level of your white blood cells, and several other parameters. Vitamin D is very important to check also. If you're a man over 40, it's a very, very good idea to have your test done for total testosterone, free testosterone, high sensitivity estrogen, and possibly a luteinizing hormone. This will give you a good idea of the status of your testosterone, and it will give you a good idea, especially the free testosterone. It'll give you a good idea of whether you are a candidate for testosterone replacement therapy. Usually, again, most of the time, testosterone levels really start to dip in men at about age 45, and I'd say about 30-40% of men. But, it's a good idea to start checking this at about age 40. But what I want to talk about today is having these lab tests done, and then your doctor calls you and tells you that, hey, buddy, you might have to come in and have a liver biopsy. Now, a liver biopsy involves taking a small bit of tissue out of your liver. It's an invasive procedure. Now, why would he suggest a liver biopsy? Well, anybody who lifts weights, if you lift weights with any level of intensity, you're going to show some abnormal lab values, especially in what they call the liver panel. The liver panel consists of various enzymes that basically give you an indication of the status of your liver. Now, if you're taking, for example, oral anabolic steroids, you're almost always going to have elevations in some of these liver enzymes, because these liver enzymes also reflect a state of inflammation in the liver. And when you take oral steroids, especially in any kind of quantity, or if you take certain ones like, for example, trenbolone, which tends to cause liver inflammation, these enzymes are going to be elevated. Usually it's temporary, usually doesn't cause any permanent damage unless you stay on the drugs too long. But even if you're not taking any steroids, again, if you lift weights, you're going to show elevations in two particular liver enzymes. These liver enzymes are ALT and AST. They're enzymes, and they're elevated when you work out. There's a couple of other enzymes I'll get to in a second, but when a doctor who's not familiar with let's say his med school biochemistry, if he's forgotten it, about lab value, he might figure that because you show these elevations in these two liver enzymes, that you're having the beginning of liver failure. So he'll suggest a biopsy. But here's the problem. Those enzymes are not just released in liver, they're also released in other tissues, including muscle. In other words, every time you work your muscle, you cause a little bit of damage, and these same two enzymes, ALT and AST, especially ALT, they're released from the muscle. And if you have a blood test done within, let's say, a week after you work out, it's a good chance that at least ALT, but possibly ALT and AST will be elevated. But it's not coming from your liver, it's coming from your muscles. And unless a physician knows this, he's going to think you're in the beginnings of severe liver problems. Now, how could you tell if it's not from the muscle, if it's in the liver rather than the muscle? Well, there's other liver enzymes. There's one called GGT. GGT, and there's another one called LDH. These enzymes are also liver enzymes, but they're not elevated unless there is an actual liver problem. So any physician can easily discern the source of the elevated enzymes just by looking at the complete liver panel. In other words, if ALT and AST are elevated and GGT and LDH are normal, then it's a 99.9% chance the elevation indicated on the blood test is not from the liver, but it's from the muscles, and therefore it's benign. It's not harmful at all. The elevation is usually not just it's not even that high. If it's super high, then it probably could be a liver problem. But it just gets elevated a little bit when you work out. In other words, it's off the normal scale, but not enough to cause any problems. Now, there's other things to be concerned about when you work out. There's a iron-containing pigment in muscle called myoglobin. And sometimes when you work out really hard, you can actually cause a release of myoglobin from the muscle. If you really overtrain or do something unusual, let's say you go from 10 reps to suddenly decide to do 100 reps in a hot day, you can get a massive breakdown of myoglobin and another enzyme in muscle called creatine kinase. Creatine kinase is involved in the metabolism of creatine. It converts creatine into creatinine. And, if you work out really hard, these things can be elevated to a huge degree. The danger is that, in the kidneys, they could block the filtering units of the kidneys. I'm talking about myoglobin, and it can actually cause renal failure. It's a condition called rhabdomyolysis, which I'll be talking about in depth in my Applied Metabolic newsletter. In other words, how to avoid it, what causes it, and possibly dietary measures to prevent it. But this is something that can also show up as abnormal in certain lab tests. Another thing that might show up with bodybuilders is certain renal or kidney tests. Very often you will show a elevation of something called BUN. BUN stands for blood urea nitrogen. It's a measure of, as it says, it's a measure of urea in your blood, basically. This urea is basically the breakdown of amino acids. Amino acids are broken down in the liver and converted into urea, and then they're sent to the kidneys where they're excreted. So basically, what this means is if you're on a high protein diet, because you're especially a huge amount of protein, I'm talking 300 grams or more, there's a good chance you might have a slight elevation in your BUN level. If you take a kidney test or a urinalysis, you might show a elevation of blood urea BUN, but this is indication. It just means that you're throwing off the protein that you're eating. In other words, you're eating the protein you're eating. A lot of it, it's not being used for, let's say, muscle building. It's being broken down in the liver, converted to urea, and being excreted out. It's not dangerous at all unless you have some pre-existing kidney problem where it strains the kidneys. But in most cases, it's a benign problem. But again, it will show up as abnormal on a kidney urinalysis test. The same with creatinine. Creatinine is another urinalysis test. Creatinine, as I said earlier, is the byproduct of creatine metabolism. Creatine is degraded into creatinine, especially if you go on a creatinine load, where you're taking in, let's say, 30 grams of 25 to 30 grams of creatine for a couple of days. After 48 hours, you're going to have a large spill-off of creatinine. And if you were to take a lab test in that time, you would show up with elevated creatinine. And again, if the physician doesn't know you're taking a lot of creatine, he would suspect a kidney problem, possibly kidney failure. So these are things, in truth though, it's benign. As a matter of fact, you can also get an elevation in BUN and creatinine, or the BUN creatinine ratio, it's called, if you're just dehydrated. If you're dehydrated, you're going to, because of less fluid going through the kidneys, whatever, you're going to show elevations of BUN and creatinine. You also show elevations up to 30% higher on the BUN creatinine ratio if you eat a consistent high protein diet. I'm talking about, let's say, 250 to 300 grams. There's a large majority of bodybuilders will show, if they take a urine analysis, will show an elevation of the BUN creatinine ratio. Again, this is because of the breakdown of the protein. It's not a dangerous condition. It doesn't mean that your kidneys are failing, but it's important to know this stuff because those of you who do monitor yourself through regular lab tests, some of these things, it's very common to show up as abnormal, the things I spoke about, and you have to tell your physician to go back and check his medical text, and he'll find that like I say, some of these enzymes come from the liver and the muscle, And the source of the elevation is the muscle from just heart training. It's not from the liver. You're not having any liver problems. You don't need a liver biopsy. You don't need a kidney biopsy. So, you know, I mean, unless the doctor knows this, it could be a lot of stress for you. Now, if you're taking steroids, there's other things that you want to look for, abnormalities in what they call blood lipids. For example, when you're taking oral steroids speed the breakdown of a protective form of cholesterol called high-density lipoprotein. And most oral steroids will give you very low levels of HDL. If you do a blood test, the normal level of HDL is 35 and up. I've seen HDL levels of top bodybuilders where it's 5 and less, where it's almost undetectable. Now, however, when I looked at the rest of their blood lipid levels, such as total cholesterol, the cholesterol was very low. It was usually, on these guys, it was maybe 150 or 140. And, you know, their LDL was also, which stands for low density lipoprotein. And that's the type, low LDL is the type of cholesterol carrier most associated with cardiovascular disease. In these guys, the LDL was usually fairly low also. So only their HDL was low, and that was because they were taking steroids. As soon as they, oral steroids, as soon as they get off the oral steroids, the HDL pops back to normal, usually in about 3 to 4 weeks. So those are the things to keep in mind. And I would strongly suggest that all of you should monitor yourself by getting regular physical examinations by a physician, and also have regular blood tests done, because they're basically a good indicator of where you stand from a health viewpoint. And by looking at this, you could kind of head off serious problems, health problems up the road. If you want further information about nutrition, exercise science, ergogenic aids, hormonal therapy, fat loss techniques that work, subscribe today to my Applied Metabolics newsletter, www.appliedmetabolics.com. There's nothing like it anywhere on the web. There's no magazines that even come close to my newsletter. It's very, very in-depth. I call it a newsletter. It's more like a monthly ebook, since each issue averages 40 to 50 pages, solid information, no ads. I'm not associated with any supplement companies. I'm not trying to push any products. My sole purpose is to provide you with 100% solid truth, evidence-based information that's easily understood. You don't have to have an advanced degree to read my stuff. I'm not going to throw a lot of technical science at you. And if I do use scientific expressions or words, I explain them immediately, so you don't have to reach for a medical dictionary. Anybody can understand. I guarantee you will learn something from every issue of Applied Metabolics, no matter what your level of education or experience is. Again, www.appliedmetabolics.com. Comes out every month on the first of the month. If you want to have the best friend you'll ever have, go to a local shelter and adopt a dog. Any dog, any breed. They're great, all of them. They're wonderful. Dogs literally exist to be man's best friend, and they truly are. Trust me on that. Take care.